So what I'd like to do today is a very brief introduction to sort of the basic ideas of Stoicism. Some of you may have heard the basics already, so I apologize for the redundancy, but I'd like to bring everybody up to speed on the topic. And then we're going to go through 3 examples. I'm going to select 3 exercises that I find particularly useful these days when I'm stuck mostly at home with long days of 12 hours a day, where I had to figure out how to use my time properly. So let me start with the basics. So Stoicism, of course, is an ancient Greek and Roman philosophy. It started around 300 BCE with a guy named Zeno of Citium. Zeno was a merchant, and he was on his way to Athens, and he had a shipwreck. And he lost pretty much everything in there. Talk about things that are outside of your control. And so he makes it to Athens, however, he survives, makes it to Athens. And of course, the first thing that he does is what everybody would do after a shipwreck. He goes to a bookstore. And, and he starts talking to the owner and reading books, going through books. And he was reading, in fact, the 2nd volume, apparently, of Xenophon's Memorabilia, which is a biography of Socrates, which survived to these days, actually. You can check it out. And Zeno was so taken by this thing that he turns to the bookseller and says, where can I find me one of these people, meaning a philosopher? And the bookseller says, well, there's one walking right outside of the shop right now, so follow him, because again, Athens was the place where you of course find philosophers walking around near bookstores. So Zeno follows this guy that turned out to be Crates of Thebes, who was a Cynic philosopher. The word did not mean at the time what it means today, but I'm not going to go into it. And so he starts studying philosophy. He eventually also studies with a number of other philosophers in Athens, including Plato's Academy, although Plato had been dead by that time. And finally, it starts teaching on his own. And he starts teaching in a very public place right outside of the Agora. The Agora was the ancient Athenian marketplace. And in this place called the Stoa Poikile, which means painted porch. It was basically a colonnade that was open for people to walk in and talk to each other and things like that. And that's where the name Stoicism comes, because they started teaching in the Stoa. This is significant because from the beginning means that Stoicism was addressed to everyday people, to anybody who might walk outside in the marketplace, as opposed to most of the other schools like Plato's Academy or Aristotle's Lyceum or Epicurus' Garden, who were actually outside of town and they were kind of isolated, secluded on purpose. You had to apply to actually get in. So that's how Stoicism got started. It became very popular in ancient Greece and then throughout the Roman Empire. And the philosophy itself can be summarized in a couple of ways. First of all, what is the goal? Well, the goal of Stoicism is to allow us to become the best human beings we can possibly be. The word that the Stoics used was arete, which is Greek for, broadly speaking, virtue. But virtue really means excellence. Arete really means excellence. So the idea is to make ourselves into the best human beings that we can. Not the perfect human beings, because very few people get to perfection, if any, but certainly the best that we can. That's the goal. And how do you do this? How do you achieve this? Well, the Stoics said that the way to become the best human being you can is to live according to nature. And living according to nature is a kind of a strange phrase. It may bring to mind images of people running naked into the woods, but that's not what it is. It basically means live according to the best of human nature. And the best of human nature for the Stoics is the fact that we are highly social animals. We thrive only in social groups and in communication with others, in interaction with others. And we all realize during these particular times just how important, in fact, social communications are. There are like more than 100 people in this virtual room, for instance. So we need to be social. And the other thing that we have that characterizes us as a species is the ability to reason through our problems. And so to live according to nature means to apply reason to make life better, particularly social life better. So the goal is to become the best human being you can. And the way you do that is by applying reason to improve society in whatever way you can. Right? So those are the basic ideas. Now, the exercises that I selected come from a book that I published recently with my friend and collaborator Greg Lopez. The book is called A Handbook for New Stoics, and actually contains a whopping 52 exercises, each one of which is taken from one of the ancient sources, and it is updated with modern science, which act about, what does cognitive science or psychology or behavioral science tell us about the efficacy of these kind of techniques. So this is all techniques that are meant, each one of which is meant to deal with one aspect of your life or social life in general. However, before we get to the exercises themselves, I need to give you a little bit of background about the guy that mostly, the ancient philosopher that Greg and I mostly use, although not exclusively, for these exercises. And his name was Epictetus. He's one of the least famous of the Stoics, at least in terms of general public. Most people know of Seneca. He was the advisor to the Emperor Nero. He had to commit suicide when it turned out that he may have been involved in a conspiracy against Nero. Most people know Marcus Aurelius, the emperor philosopher who wrote the Meditations. But Epictetus is not exactly a household name, although things are changing and he's becoming more and more recognizable. Epictetus was a slave that was brought to Rome, in fact, it was a contemporary Seneca, so to the court of the Emperor Nero. Eventually, he was a brilliant guy, and he was freed by his master, and he studied philosophy in Rome, and eventually started teaching philosophy. In fact, he was teaching the kind of philosophy that was speaking truth to power, so to speak, and so he got really on the nerves of a couple of emperors until the mission, 2 emperors after Nero, sent Epictetus into exile, and Epictetus went to northwestern Greece in a place called Nicopolis, where he restarted his school. Epictetus had a particular brand of Stoicism, which I think is very useful. And the best way probably to understand Epictetus' approach to Stoicism is to talk about his famous 3 disciplines. He thought that there are 3 areas of life, I suppose, where we need to get better, to improve. And these areas give the names to the 3 disciplines. The 3 disciplines are desire, action, and assent. Desire, the discipline of desire, means that often we tend to desire the wrong things, or things that are not good for us. Right? Too much food, too much drinking, spending too much money shopping, or something like that. And we don't actually focus our attention. We don't actually turn our attention to desire, to things that we should be desiring, such as improving ourselves, having good relations with other people, and so on and so forth. So the discipline of desire is a series of exercises, comprised of a series of exercises to, in a sense, retune our desires, to move away from stuff that we shouldn't really embrace, and to move toward things that we really should be embracing. But that's the first one. The second one is the discipline of action. The discipline of action is concerned with how to deal with other people. Because as I said, we're in a society. We're not individuals, left to our own devices. And so one of the important questions we have to answer is, well, how do we interact with other people? How do we relate to other people? That's the discipline of action. And then the discipline of assent. Assent means agreeing, right, on something. The discipline of assent is about how to improve our judgment. Because according to the Stoics, often we jump to conclusions, we arrive at judgments that are actually not really particularly well thought out. We're too quick to judge situations and people, and often when we do, we actually get it wrong. And so the discipline of assent is essentially meant to improve our ability to arrive at correct judgments whenever possible. And so the 3 exercises that I'm going to be talking about in the next few minutes have to do are examples from each for each one of the 3 disciplines that I just mentioned: desire, action, and assent. So let's start with the discipline of desire. And the exercise, Greg and I call this exercise, discover what is really under your control and what is not, which is something that, as has been mentioned already a couple of times, we all have to actually deal with very, very much in these times of pandemics. For each exercise, I'm going to read a short quote. As it turns out, all 3 of these quotes are from Epictetus. And in fact, from a particular book by Epictetus called the Enchiridion, or Manual, or Handbook for How to Live Your Life. And I'll read the quote, and then I'll explain what the quote means and what the exercise actually consists of. So Epictetus says, all existing things, some are in our power and others are not in our power. In our power are thought, impulse, will to get, and will to avoid, and in a word, everything which is our own doing. Things not in our power include the body, property, reputation, office, and in a word, everything which is not our undoing. What he's saying here is that the human agency is very limited, and pretty much a way to rephrase what I just read is that pretty much the only things that are completely up to us are our own judgments, endorsed values, and decisions to act or not to act. Okay? So when we say this is a good thing, well, that's a judgment, and it's a value that we endorse, or this is a bad thing, that's a judgment that we endorse. That's up to us. Nobody else can force us. Other people, of course, can influence our judgments, for sure. But ultimately, if I state my own opinion and you say, and you challenge me, well, you are right to challenge me because it is my opinion. I can't just say, well, I heard it on TV or I read it in a book. If it is my opinion, I'm the one that is responsible because I'm putting it forth. And that actually is pretty much all that we are completely in control of, according to Epictetus. Everything else, there are things that we can influence, but ultimately don't depend on us. And let me focus in particular on the very first one that Epictetus mentions there, essentially our health, when he says body. Well, of course, I can influence my health, right? I can eat healthy, even under a pandemic. You know, with my wife, we're trying to be careful and eat, you know, as healthy as possible. And I can exercise. Even in the middle of a pandemic, we turned out we live in an apartment in Brooklyn that has 16 floors. So I turned the apartment building stairs into a Stairmaster. And, you know, every day I go up and down the stairs to exercise. So you can do that sort of stuff, right? And of course, when we go out, we're as careful as we can reasonably be in terms of, you know, distancing and in terms of then wiping things down when we get back home. Nevertheless, the ultimate outcome is not up to us. We know perfectly well that we could get sick. Even though we're doing everything that we can not to, it is very possible that, you know, the virus is pretty sneaky. And it's very possible that we're going to get it. Or it's possible that our health is going to suffer in some other way. I mean, we have no idea, right? Well, obviously, one of the side products of this pandemic is that you can't go to the doctor. I mean, the other day, a couple of weeks ago, I was supposed to have a appointment with one of my doctors, and we did it online, like we're doing it right now. But, you know, it's not quite the same thing. She had to do some blood work, and obviously she's not going to be able to do the blood work until this whole thing is over, or at least until there is a respite from it. So who knows? I may have something else that's going on in my body. I have no idea. Right? So all of those things are not up to us. Well, so what does that mean in practice? In practice, this means that, according to the Stoics, that we should try to refocus our efforts on the things that are in fact up to us, and then develop an attitude of equanimity, of acceptance for the things that are not up to us. Realizing that external things such as health, wealth, relations with other people, etc., we can work on them, but ultimately, sometimes things will go our way and sometimes they won't go our way. And we are adults, we're not children, so we know this. We should keep this in mind. And when things don't go our way, we don't throw a tantrum because we're not children. We just accept it and say, well, better luck next time. You know, I'm going to work on it next time. So in practice, the exercise goes like this. Suppose that you have a challenge, such as, a job interview. People are still doing job interviews via Zoom or similar platforms, right? Even though people are losing a lot of jobs these days. But say that you have to do something like that. It comes natural to us to focus on the outcome. I want the job. But the outcome is one of those things that are not up to us. Again, we can influence them, we can work on it, but ultimately it is up to the interviewer to decide whether we get the job or not. And that depends on a large number of factors that are certainly not under our control, like who else is applying for the job, or what the mood of the interviewer is that day. Maybe he just got up on the wrong side of the bed and he's in a bad mood and he's not going to react well to whatever we say. So the outcome is not up to us. What is up to us, of course, is the preparation, is to put the best CV possible into place, to focus during an interview, to dress appropriately, even though if you are on Zoom, you don't want to show up in your pajamas and things like that. So the exercise consists in this. Anytime you have a challenge, large or small as it may be, start thinking about it in this way. Make two parallel lists. Use a piece of paper or a word processor or whatever. Make two columns, and on one column on the left side, write down things that you think are up to you under this particular situation or with regard to this particular problem. And on the right side, put down things that are not up to you, that ultimately you can influence, but you cannot ultimately control. And then go through the list over and over and repeat to yourself that you should be focusing on the left side of the list and develop an attitude of acceptance for whatever is going to come out in terms of the right list, right? And I find this exercise, I and a lot of other people find this exercise actually very useful because it's calming, it's focusing. It's equivalent essentially in modern psychological terms to internalize your goals. Instead of focusing on the outcome of something, you focus on your own effort, because the effort are in fact up to you, the outcomes, as I said, are not. The second exercise that I'm going to propose is has to do with the discipline of action, the second discipline. And it has to do, which therefore has to do with other people, to how to deal with other people. This one is one of my favorite exercises. Greg and I called it keep your peace of mind in mind. Here's the quote from the Enchiridion, and then I'm going to explain what it is and how to do the exercise. When you're about to take something in hand, remind yourself what manner of thing it is. If you're going to bathe, put before your mind what happens in the bath. He's talking about public baths, as they used to have them in ancient Rome. Water pouring over some, others being jostled, some reveling, others stealing. And you will set to work more securely if you say to yourself at once, I want to bathe, and I want to keep my will in harmony with nature. And so in each thing you do. For in this way, if anything turns up to hinder you in your bathing, you will be ready to say, I did not want only to bathe, but to keep my will in harmony with nature. And I shall not so keep it if I lose my temper at what happens. So what is he talking about? He's talking about a situation that is clearly not entirely under his control. If you haven't experienced going to the baths lately, think about going to a movie theater. Don't we all wish that we could go to a movie theater right now? But think about the old days where you could go into a movie theater, and of course, at least in my experience, what would happen more often than not, that you sit down, the lights go down, the movie starts, and then some jerk in the second row in front of you turn on his cell phone because he absolutely has to post something on Facebook or text somebody else or whatever it is, apparently not realizing or not caring that the people behind them are actually now not enjoying the movie anymore because they're distracted by the flickering of the phone. This is a situation equivalent to Epictetus going to the baths, right? And when he says, well, whenever you're in that situation, remember that you always have two goals, not just one. One is to enjoy whatever it is that you set out to enjoy. In the case that I just mentioned, you go to the movies, you want to enjoy watching the movie. Now, that's what you paid for, that's what you got together with your friends for, and so on. But at the same time, you should also tell yourself that you also want to keep harmony with nature. What does that mean? It means particularly keep harmony with human nature. In other words, you want to be in a harmonious relationship, both with yourself and with other people. Okay? And if you get upset, if you start losing your temper, that's not going to happen, obviously. And the trick here is, it's the mental trick that Epictetus is advising us to perform, is to go out with these expectations. There is one thing, notice that it's under your control. It's up to you, keeping harmony with nature, keep calm and in harmonious relationship with others. And the other one is not up to you. That's to enjoy your experience at the movies or whatever it is you're doing. This can also be applied, of course, at home, because you don't need to go out to the movies if you're living with other people and you're doing things with other people. And sometimes, let's say dinner together, or watching a movie from home together, or something like that, right? Well, sometimes even that simple activity is not necessarily going to go your way, because it's going to be the other person is going to do something and maybe it's going to annoy you, or there's some distraction is coming in and you can't read. You wanted to read your book that evening and you can't read your book because there's a distraction, or somebody else in the apartment next door turns on the music and all of a sudden you can't focus on whatever you were doing, right? The trick in all of these situations, again, is to say, well, I wanted to do this, but I knew that was not necessarily under my control, succeeding. On the other hand, I also want to keep in peace and in harmony with my neighbors and my friends, with my family, so that is up to me. In practice, the way this exercise actually works is that you do a sort of a premeditation of the situation. So you think ahead of time, and you say, well, what am I about to do tonight? I am about to watch television with my, wife or husband or partner. Well, what's your goal? When your goal is to watch and to have a nice time, but also not to get upset and to keep good relation, not only with yourself, but with her or him. And by thinking about it ahead of time, evidence in modern psychology shows that your mind is in fact prepared. And so when something does happen, that it's not going to go exactly as you predicted, or something might have been annoying under different circumstances, you say, oh, okay, well, I knew that was possibly going to happen. And you are far better prepared not to get upset, not to lose your temper. The third and last exercise that I want to propose is from the discipline of assent. The discipline of assent, as I mentioned earlier, has to do with improving our judgment about things. The Stoics thought that we jump to conclusions too often, too quickly, without much of a sort of a background information about people, about situations, and so on and so forth. And so we need to correct that, because that's not good for us, arriving at incorrect judgments, and it's also not good for our relations with other people. So here's the exercise. Again, it's from a quote. The inspiration comes from a quote from Epictetus in the Enchiridion, and it goes like this. Remember that foul words or blows in themselves are not outrage, but your judgment that they are so. So when anyone makes you angry, know that it is your own thought that has angered you. Wherefore, make it your first endeavor not to let your impressions carry you away. For if once you gain time and delay, you will find it easier to control yourself. So this is about anger management, essentially. And the Stoics were big on anger management. The Stoics thought that anger is the most disruptive negative emotion that human beings can possibly experience. Because when we act on the basis of anger is natural. So there's no way to suppress it. Often people say, oh, so the Stoics tried to suppress emotions. There's no such a thing as suppressing emotions. It's not possible to suppress emotions. But you can manage them. That's the point. That's why even modern psychologists refer to anger management, not anger suppression. The Stoics were the same. Seneca wrote an entire book called On Anger. And as it turns out, he actually goes very detailed on the nature of anger and how you can deal with anger. And last time, and I checked the website on the American Psychological Association under anger management, like 80% of the stuff that's out there is essentially Seneca, updated, of course, with modern research, but it's about the same kind of insight. So what Epictetus says here is that we should pause when angry. That when we're feeling the first movement of anger, the beginning of anger is this feeling that you might have, this physiological reaction, which we know it's due to a release of adrenaline, that you feel you're getting upset about something. And if you do that, that is an obvious alarm bell. It's impossible to miss. Now, there's a couple things you could do, right? Most of us might have the temptation of sort of stay with it and say, no, I'm gonna deal with it. I'm gonna sort of suppress it, put it down, and I'm a reasonable person, and so on and so forth. Don't, because it's a losing battle. Most of the times, the anger will just keep going, and at some point, you really get upset, and things are gonna get worse and worse. The other thing you obviously don't want to do is like, oh yeah, great, I'm feeling angry, so let me go for it and punch somebody on the nose. That's not a thing to do either, right? The thing to do is to disengage, is to create some space between you and the situation. That's what modern psychologists call literally cognitive distancing, right? It can be done depending on the situation. It can be done in a number of ways. If you start counting until 20, or go through the alphabet. Engage in some deep breathing, from the diaphragm, because that actually does bring down immediately your physiological reaction. It does actually have an effect of that sort. Or simply walk away, get out, go for a walk if you can, go in another room, go to the bathroom. I read once a Stoic practitioner who is a waiter in New York, and he has a very stressful job. You would think that it's very stressful because the customers tend sometimes to sort of be demanding, and sometimes that's the case. But he said that actually most of the stress comes from fellow waiters and their pressure about doing things or not doing things. And so what he does on a regular basis, when he feels this thing mounting on, he just goes to the bathroom for a minute. So goes there and just disengages from the situation, calms down, and once he's calm, he says, "Okay, how am I dealing with this particular issue? How am I going to respond to that person?" Comment, or how am I going to respond to this particular situation? So that's the notion that you need to be quick on the judgment of your own situation, of self analysis essentially, and then once you calm down, once you actually have this distancing, then you go back to the situation and say, okay, why exactly did I get upset? And it turns out that a lot of the times there was no particular good reason to get upset. Not always. Sometimes there are good reasons to get upset, but often it's like, oh, that person said something that rubbed me the wrong way. Okay, so what? It's not the end of the world, and maybe he or she did not even mean it. I mean, you don't know. Another instance of this kind of exercise that also comes from Epictetus is a situation where he says, where he reminds his students to say, don't say things like that person drinks too much, because that's a judgment. You don't know if it is too much for him or not. You have no idea about his background, why he's doing what he's doing, and that sort of stuff. Just say, oh, he drinks above average. Right? So try to re-describe the situation in objective terms. And re-describing the situation in objective terms, especially using a second or third person when you're re-describing, it's as if you were talking to a friend or if you're talking to somebody else. There is again evidence from modern psychology that actually that does work. It calms you down and it distances you from the situation, and it allows you to analyze that situation better, to do exactly what the Stoics told us: live according to nature, use reason instead of an immediate response that it's driven by your emotions to deal with whatever the problem is. And this may be a small problem, as I said, minor inconvenience that you have, even especially when you are in a situation that is by its own nature stressful, like the one we're all experiencing, or if you're dealing with the big things in life. It's always a good thing to slow down. Just to play on the famous commercial, I guess the part of what Seneca and Epictetus are saying here is that instead of just do it, you should slow down, think about it, and then decide whether it's actually a good idea to do it or not to do it. So that's pretty much all I wanted to say today. And I don't know, Richard, do you